Welcome back to DAP Books Podcast. I'm your host, Willie Roberry, and today we are joined by one of D'Angelo Publications' authors of the book Rolling into Bed, Anthony Walls. Hi.
Hi.
It's nice to have you here.
Man, I'm honored to be here, so thank you.
Yeah, it's actually our first time meeting in person. I mean, we talked for a little before this, but it's really
Yeah,
good to see you in person. I was
yeah.
talking with Kim, who was on before you. She was our last one here, about how since most of our communication is over email and such,
Mhm.
we don't really have a grasp of the authors until we meet them in person. And we agreed that one of the best parts of this job is finally meeting people in person and
Yeah.
like solidifying who that person is for us. And I didn't work with you when we were working on the book because this one, I think this was already in the works when I first started working for D'Angelo. But over the very brief phone call we had,
Yeah.
you know.
Well, for
It's
me, it's like I'm getting to meet a celebrity, right? Like, I've seen the podcast a couple times, and I'm like, wow, I get to meet Willie? This is awesome.
Flattery will get you everywhere. It is interesting to talk about the dynamic between like the author and the publisher. That's something.
Mm.
Can you tell us? I actually don't know this. How did you get in contact with D'Angelo? How'd your book? How'd that
Oh, that's a
connection
good
form?
question. Well, after I wrote the book, I sat on it for a bit and really questioned what to do with this with this creation.
Mm.
And family and friends thought, this is really something. This could be something. You should really look into it. And so, I looked into all the different possibilities. You hiring your own illustrator and try to self-publish,
Mm.
or try to get published with a publishing company, if you will. And I honestly went to Google and found multiple publishing companies that were accepting
Mm.
um, scripts, and so I submitted my script not just to D'Angelo, but to a few publishing companies. But within a week, D'Angelo got back to me, and Sequoia actually called me on and set up a time to talk on the phone. Um, really saw the really saw the idea of the book right away, and I think we totally connected in that way. She completely saw the idea that I had for this book, and after that, we decided to continue to work together.
Perfect.
So
That's great. I didn't know that. I do want to come back to that a little later on, about the process of creating the book after you found the publisher. But can you first tell us how this book came to be? Because this is the first book you've published, and
this is the first time I've ever published anything, right? So it came to be. I would say out of two different things coming together, or merging, if you will. So number one, reading and books are just huge in our household. Emily, my wife, and I, ever since we've had our first kid, I mean, even before they probably could understand and interpret any meaning of a word, we were reading to them, and it's just part of our routine at night. Our kids now are 10, 7, and 5, and every night, we make sure that we block off time to do reading. And you can imagine the amount of kids' books, therefore, that you read. And Emily and I would joke about, this book was good, but this other one, they really missed the mark. They could have done so much more, maybe taken that metaphor a little better, anyways. So I just, personally love reading. And the more I've read, the more I've realized I also want to write. And so when I do write, I write down things that I think I would want my children to learn
Mhm.
as they grow up. The second thing that was happening was I was totally getting addicted to jujitsu, and on my own little personal journey of a hobby. And I always thought it was really interesting that we do these very violent things that we term submissions, but some of them are chokeholds, and some people call them sleeper holds because if somebody doesn't tap out, they'll quote go to sleep. And we're using such a non-violent phrase for a violent thing. It just kind of always made me laugh. And so inside my brain, I was always kind of joking around about making a going to sleep book out of the jujitsu sleep holds, if you will. Uh, and eventually, the idea spawned in my mind to actually have something of substance
Mhm.
that would hopefully teach kids more than just sleep holes.
Yeah.
But in the grand metaphor of going to sleep book. Yeah.
So, when you first had the idea, did you specifically want it to be a children's book?
Yeah, yeah, I think so. I think because, well, like I said, number one, we were in a,
Mhm.
a zone of just reading these children books. But when I think of going to sleep, I think about, I honestly think well, in a book form, I
Mhm.
think about children's books a lot. And so I always just wondered if there was a way to take that imagery and then translate it into a kid's book.
I think you did a great job. When you initially submitted it to us, it was just the words, right?
Right, right. Just the actual written, almost poem, because it's a
Mhm.
bit of more of a poem, if you will,
Yeah.
like a lot of
Like the
kids books are.
cadency kids
Yeah,
books, yeah.
yeah,
So finding we were talking about this a little bit beforehand, but so working with the illustrator,
yeah,
how was that? And how did you say that relationship formed too? D'Angelo.
yeah. So D'Angelo already had a working relationship, I think, with Wadi, and then uh in fact, that was part of the package, if you will,
Mm,
that D'Angelo was offering as a publisher, is that, hey, we can even help find and hook you up with an
mhm,
illustrator if you don't have one, which I didn't. And I'm definitely not an illustrator myself.
mhm.
I think this book would be just a complete 180 if I did the illustration. So I'm so appreciative for that connection. The other thing, though, is that I really did want the jujitsu in it to be as accurate as possible. I think it's a disservice if we're showing things that are not good, if you will. And Wadi hadn't done or didn't really know too much about jujitsu. Um, but he was really excited about the book, and he was somebody who loved to learn. And so when he would come back with illustrations, it was always met with any recommendations for editing. And so just moving like a hand or a foot into a different location was never met with any resistance. He was really excited to take on the challenge.
That's great. That is one of our bigger worries whenever we introduce like an author and an illustrator or an author and an editor, even that there might be like a clash between them because sometimes people take a lot of pride in their work
Yeah, that's a
because
good point.
Mhm. And like obviously it's your creation and you want people to see the same thing you see when you work together on it. And I think with editing, it might be a bit more of butting heads, but especially for an illustrator, they are literally bringing your words to life, like bringing the picture to it. So we always worry that there might be some form of contention, but I'm really glad that you guys work so well together and he did such a good job. Uh,
Oh, yeah, no, there was no butting heads. Even with the editing process, there was really helpful feedback and suggestions and some tweaks here and there that it needed. I mean, let's be honest. Uh, I This is my first time publishing a book.
right.
I'm no savant by any means when it comes to authorship. So I was so appreciative of the everything that D'Angelo provided along the journey, if you will.
We do appreciate hearing that. Um I was going to ask you because you're in the medical field right now.
Yeah.
So, you saying that this is the first venture into writing a book. This
Mhm.
is Can you sort of speak to what it's like just being like the average person writing a book for the first time? Because a lot of people, they have these ideas like you. They read to their kids. They think that they can create something that they'd want other people to experience as well. So how did that all get started for you? Like, were you able to just write the story you wanted, or did it take a long while? Or
Mm. Um, I think it took a long while. But the not necessarily the writing aspect. I think coming up with something that had some substance,
uh,
because I had an idea, but the idea, in my opinion, was more making light of, like I said, making light of these sleep hold submissions in a giant metaphor of a going to sleep book. But what actual message am I trying to impart um, to, say, readers, and
mhm.
thus, mainly children of the book? And that, honestly, I would say, going and working on how to turn it into something that not only made sense, but had that message, probably took, gosh, about 8, 9 months, to be honest, of
Mm.
me just jostling it around. But once I had the idea, I then, like, put pen to paper, and I had a first draft, within that same day. Of course, then it was a lot of editing over
Right.
weeks and revising, and, "Oh, maybe I shouldn't use this," because it's about a girl being scared of monsters under the bed. "Maybe I shouldn't use this monster, maybe this one, and
Mm.
how do I get this word to rhyme?" And
Yeah.
so, yeah, it took a process. I would say from the time I had the idea of the book to when it was actually published, it was a couple years. It was a couple years because it was almost like under a year from me having the idea to actually having something I wanted to submit, and then after submitting, it was another whole year for, illustrating, editing.
Mhm. It
So,
takes a lot of dedication in order to
definitely.
get this out into the world, but,
Yeah.
once you're able to hold it in your hands for the first
Yeah.
time,
Yeah, that's a good point.
it just feels worth it. Um, that is I do wonder because obviously I work in the publishing industry, so I know how long books can take to create, but I sometimes worry that people, um conceptualize how much time it will take and then are like scared off of creating something just because of
Mm,
it, which is it makes sense. It makes sense. So,
sure, it's not for the faint of heart, and,
mhm,
yeah, uh but it's totally worthwhile if you enjoy it.
mhm.
That's really what makes it worthwhile.
Yeah, and if you have something to say, that the message that you wanted to have the audience receive in this book, did you go into the writing with that in mind?
Yeah, I think I went into the writing with the message. The message is one of, honestly, of to be uh, to be totally frank, is about having respect and even empathy for others. Um, but what was surprising to me is some of the ways in which this book has inspired people, and I should say kids, and helped them with things that I was not even thinking about during the writing. For example, there is a friend of mine that I roll with at our jujitsu gym, and he came up to me. This was just a couple months ago, and he said, "Are you planning on writing any other books?" And I said, "Well, actually, yeah, I've been working on some." And and he said, "Because I just got to tell you something. When your book was published and it came out, my now ex-wife and I were going through a really tough divorce. And then around the time that the book came out, she actually left my daughter and I, and it was, as you can imagine, so hard on my daughter." And he said that, with time, them together going to counseling, there's been a lot of healing and they're in a better place now. But in the thick of it, she was every night having just such fear, and she would bring this book to him every night and have him read it to her. And he told me that she found so much peace in it. Um, and what he said to me is like, he said, "Dude, we all have monsters under the bed, like adults and kids." And I love how this book deals with, the metaphorical fears of monsters under the bed. And I was blown away. I mean, because
Wow.
I believe it. I mean, I was blown away because I also am a child who, when I was about 11 or 12 years old, my parents divorced,
Mm.
and it wasn't easy. It was hard. And my story isn't the same as this little girl's story. But when I went to write this book, I didn't have necessarily that population of children in mind, but I was just so wonderfully blessed that it helped this particular child. It made every part of however long the journey was to write this book, it made everything about it worth it. It was such a great story to hear.
Oh, that's
So,
wonderful. And even like 2, 3, I don't know how long ago this was published. I think it was back in like early 2022, though. Like two
yeah,
years after this, you're still hearing that. That's
yeah.
amazing. That's really.
Yeah, it was wonderful. So yeah, I had ideas of what I wanted to impart, but
Mhm,
I mean, the book also speaks to it's really cool. I mean, that's the thing about poetry, right? It
mhm,
speaks and thus literature, it speaks to people in different ways,
mhm.
depending on how you interpret it.
Yeah, and children especially, like they obviously what we put in children's books is really important because the most important thing will always be what the child takes away from it.
Yeah.
And if it's a story like this, they'll always see themselves as
Yeah.
whoever's in it. And
Yeah.
so
Right.
I'm sure this book helped give her a lot of strength going through all of that. That's really wonderful.
Yeah. I think so too.
Do you have any other stories that kind of made you think, ah, yes, this is all worth it. This is what I worked for. If not, that's also okay.
Well, I mean, seeing the final product was really cool. And I think we'll have a moment to maybe share a little bit of the book at the end of the podcast, or at least that's what I'm told.
Yeah.
Uh, but in the middle of it, there's a scene, and it's probably my favorite scene. And it's a scene at which point the little main character, the young girl in the book, is learning that it's okay and it's all right to be able to defend yourself, but the reality is it's more important to respect and build these relationships with people, and even things that are potentially scary. And there's this scene where her and all the monsters are in a circle together. And that was inspired by the first jujitsu gym that I trained at, which was owned and ran by John Jensen, who he's somebody who had a philosophy that's quite different than, say, what you would think a standard martial arts gym is, where people typically are lining up very hierarchical by belt level before the beginning of the class. And he would just have a circle. And the reason was because, you know, yeah, we all know who probably might be able to, roll harder and or, maybe a little better at techniques or things like that. But when we're starting and ending the class, we're all giving each other an equal amount of respect. We're all here to be human beings in this milieu. It's not about jujitsu. It's not about, you know, any martial art. It's really just about us living together, hopefully in a peaceful way. And so seeing that page with them all in the circle, it just brought me so much joy because John, yeah, he's a good friend of mine now, still to this day. But that philosophy, I think, has really rubbed off on me a bit.
Mm,
So
that's great. That's um it really I don't know much about martial arts at all, but I feel like even though it is pretty hierarchical, that's not a
yeah,
word. I can't say that. Um
hierarchical.
or
Is that right?
hierarchical.
Yeah. There's usually a
there's
hierarchy.
there's usually a hierarchy that people adhere to. I feel
Yeah.
like something they always preach within it is like having respect for the people you're up against. But that might be wrong. I'm like,
No, that's
yeah.
true. That's true. He just wanted that respect to be, and I think that's true even in the gyms that line people up, with hierarchy, if you will. But the point is that he wanted people to see that. He wanted, people to come together in a circle to understand that from an imagery point of view. It's the
Ah,
artist of him coming out, and I always appreciated that.
actually, that clicks for me now.
Yeah.
Obviously, I've read your book several times going through it,
It's a
but
quick read, yeah. So.
it's a quick read. Everyone will hear it today. But sometimes when you're reading things, knowing the reason behind it, uh, it makes you able to connect with it more. So
Yeah.
so I like
Yeah. Oh, 100% agree.
not being a part of this community, hearing you
Yeah.
explain these things to us. It's really helpful, and it's really it gives like the average audience more respect for what you're able to create. It's really
No, I appreciate hearing that. Yeah.
thanks. I want to take the podcast to be able to learn more about the authors
Mm.
as people. So, since we have quite a bit of time left, can you tell us do you have any stories from your childhood that really left a mark on you that you might
Mm.
have been trying to mimic in the creation of your own?
Oh, that's a good question, man. Um, Story specifically from my childhood.
Mm.
So I grew up in a small town in the middle of the desert of California,
Ah,
a little town called Ridgecrest. It's off the 395 if you're driving up towards Bishop Mammoth, in that area. And as you pass by, you'd probably think like, "Who the heck would live out here?"
like the small middle of
Yeah,
nowhere
we used
town.
to have a sign that said "Welcome to Ridgecrest, Gateway to Death Valley," until a witty high school prankster painted over Valley. But I promise it wasn't me. They soon changed the sign. Um, but uh, but yeah, I think that growing up, no matter where you grow up, whether it's in the middle of nowhere or in the middle of a city like Los Angeles, I think fear is a normal thing for kids. And I remember, um, maybe this is like something that desert kids, but I remember being afraid of aliens, growing up,
Ah,
and particularly at night. So quiet, so dark, with no city lights and things like that. Um, but I do remember always wondering, you know, would they be friendly? Maybe they'll be friendly. Where I'm going with this is that as you grow up and you start developing or having other fears, the typical fears of junior high and friend groups and social
Mhm.
fears and social anxieties. I think like the heart of it that in retrospect, I wasn't this wise as a kid, or not that I'm calling myself like super wise, but we always look back and think, gosh, I wish I would have known, what I know now,
Mhm.
right? But in the reality, a lot of people or other people or things that are attacking us, and this isn't 100% of the time, but they're scared too. And they're afraid of something, and a lot of times acting out of that fear. And so, the dedication in my book is to my kids, and it's something I really try hard to impart on them, and that is love first and then act. Instead of thinking through something, love through something in the sense of try to put yourself in, say, that other person's shoes or that other thing's shoes, or if you're doing something out of love, which is uh, rather than just out of self-interest, how would this situation go differently?
Mhm.
And so I think that growing up as a kid who had fears, um, and now in retrospect realizing how many times situations can be completely diffused with love rather than violence and jujitsu
Mhm.
is, gosh, I think the world would just be a better place if we all acted that way, which unfortunately we don't, but. Yeah, something we can all strive to or
Yeah,
toward.
that's really lovely. Love first and then act. I like that a lot. I might start saying that.
Please do spread
That's
it
really
around. I
good.
mean, I do believe in it. So
I think, oh, people are just we're all just doing our best here, and
that's true. I think that's true. I think that's true.
I think it's nice, because anyone because now I'm thinking about social fears and like kids in school and like bullies and such. But anyone can pick up this book and see themselves as the little girl fighting the monsters. Like the bully and the one getting bullied, they're both
Yeah.
going through, and I'm not condoning bullying, but I just mean
No, no,
that.
it's huge. Like, and
Mhm,
bullying's a big thing. I mean, not. I mean, bullying is a real thing, and it
mm,
was when I was a kid. Still for our kids
mhm,
and their friends, and it's sad, but it's true. And I mean, bullying happens even out, in
yeah.
adult land, if you will.
Mm,
In fact, though, I've written actually a whole graphic novel script, and it's all about this particular one's about bullying, and how this main character is navigating life at school with this bully. Um, but my point in bringing that up is maybe that one day that'll actually get published too. But
mm.
point in bringing it up is you know fears are more than just monsters under the bed, right?
Yeah.
The metaphorical monster under the bed, and for kids, bullying and social ostracization and all those things are real.
Mhm,
Um, and so, yeah, if there's a way that we can help our own kids or other kids to wrestle with these really difficult topics
mhm.
and grapple with them, in a book, when they're faced with it, then hopefully they'll have a good reaction or a positive one.
Yeah. It's not like we can stop things like bullying
No.
altogether. We can just teach
Yeah.
them and
Yeah.
hope that they're able to integrate it into their lives and be better, feel better. We're just doing our best.
Exactly. Exactly.
um I feel like I feel like that was a really nice topic to kind of end this on. But I did want you to read this book. We always end
Okay.
with our authors reading an excerpt from their book. Since you have a kid's book, I feel like you'll be able to read the whole thing, if
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Um,
Totally.
I remember in grade school, they would always read it and then show the picture
Right. Right.
to the audience, but you can do it however you want to.
Yeah. So we'll pretend no. But yeah, so I'll just open
Oh,
it
yes,
up.
your camera is there.
Yeah, I mean the illustrations really make this book what it is.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've got to show the pictures for sure.
Show it off.
All right. Dad, come here quick. I heard a loud noise. Wasn't that you playing with your toys? You heard it too, so it wasn't in my head. I think that there are monsters under my bed. Oh, them? Don't be afraid. They're a harmless crew. And if they act up, they're easy to subdue. Seriously? How can that be? Won't the monsters come after me? If they do, that's why you learn jujitsu. Tell me your fears, and then we can review. I'm afraid of a big werewolf. Then take the wolf's back, and a rear naked choke should stop its attack. Also, I'm afraid of a tall, toothy vampire. Vampires love to put on dark cloaks, so all you need is a collar choke. What about a giant hairy yeti? The one with broad shoulders and muscles so firm, laying on your best darse will cause it to squirm. But Dad, what if a green alien comes? Hold its arm and hook your leg. A triangle choke will make it big. How about a cranky old troll? That's easy. Just walk around the clock and you will give it a shock. Okay, I'm starting to see. But what if an 8-armed monster comes after me? Then you'll have a choice among 8 in order to arm triangulate. Dad, this is such a relief. I can use my skills to put them to sleep. Actually, my dear, putting them to sleep isn't the mission when we apply a thoughtful submission. The intended effect is to earn their respect. So when they tap out, we kindly let go. It's their bedtime too, so let's share what you know. I will teach them my bedtime routine, then we'll roll into bed as a team. First, we brush our teeth and hair. I gotta be honest, the giant ogre teeth, so good.
They're great.
Wow, he did so good. Then we clean our room with care. This is probably my second child, Cora, her favorite thing. She loves the werewolf now turned into the helpful dog.
Helpful dog.
We choose our PJs and get dressed and climb into bed for our rest. We read a wonderful story, then croon a dreamy lullaby, slightly off tune. I put that one in there because I can't sing.
You can't sing.
So, with gratitude, we reflect on our day, and with peaceful thoughts, we then hit the hay.
Thank you for reading.
Yeah, no, thank you for the
I feel
opportunity.
Yeah, of course. I feel like it's hard because we've been talking so much about like the message in this book, and I was like, maybe you should read it first so everyone knows what we're talking about. But that would be silly. So I hope everyone listening can understand what we were talking about this entire time. How well you're able to incorporate everything into a kid's book. It's really cute. I love kids' books.
Thanks, Lily. Thank you.
You did a great
Thank
job
you.
with it.
Well, I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Again, thank you so much for coming.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I really do hope we'll be able to see each other in person again soon because this has been wonderful. We like having, these interactions with our authors. So
I hope so too. This has been fun.
this has been fun. And you'll meet Alma and Sequoia in person too.
Awesome.
This will be
Awesome.
great.
Yeah.
So again, thank you for coming. And thank you everyone who's listening or watching. This has been Anthony Walls on DAP Books Podcast. Be sure to follow along for more episodes. We post every other week. Be sure to follow along on our socials. It is DAP Books Pod on Instagram and D'Angelo Publications everywhere else. Thank you again for listening. And remember, love first, then act.
That's right.